Alright, welcome back guys, it's Colin with the Sun Pirates TCG, and I'm joined today with my lovely co-host, Trevor. It's been a while, Trevor.
It's been a while, holy shit.
It has been. So yeah, it's been a hot minute since we've done these kinds of like meta discussion videos, but today thought it'd be fun to do a tier list for the up-and-coming One Piece Set 7, which, yeah, quite a big shakeup between obviously all the new decks that came out and with Sakazuki being banned, of course. So yeah, let's get right into it. So we already have the tier list already made for you guys. Figured that'd be better than the vast majority of tier lists in which I'm pretty sure 95% of you guys already skip to the end anyway to see what the end result is. So
yep, exactly. He's saying you just hear our clean cut thoughts. Not to say that our thoughts are going to be super clean, because I mean it's still very early on in the meta and we haven't even really seen a big tournament yet for it. Super excited to see the first tournament for this set, and I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Colin, the first one is Gen Con, or we still get earlier online events?
Oh, we certainly have. There might be some online events or in-person events outside of North America, but at least within North America, we definitely have the what are they called? The store regionals or store championship regionals.
Right. Yeah.
This month.
By the way, good luck to everybody who got into those, or if you're still on the wait list, still good luck, because I know that those are not easy to get into.
Or if you got into 5 of them, you know who you are. Have fun. So
hey, good luck. Good luck.
Yeah, good luck regardless. But yeah, anyways, like Trevor was saying, obviously things on this tier list are subject to change. Just to go over just the main criteria that we've made the tiers on. So S tier is obviously the best of the best, the cream of the crop. These are the decks that you will more than likely see in the top 8 of a regional or other major tournaments. A tier, not that far behind, to be honest with you. You will likely see these in the top 32 to 16, depending on the size of the tournament, obviously. Basically, you'll probably see this on an Eggman video, if and when we have event results come out. B tier is the decks that you might see here and there in the top tables or in the top cut of a regional. Not necessarily the most popular, both by sheer numbers and just by in general power level, right? But still pretty good, just not quite the level of S and A tier. And then C tier are kind of the dark horses, so to speak. Definitely, I would argue significantly less consistent in terms of results statistically than all the other decks, but still have a fighting chance. And you might see these once in a blue moon by specific individuals at the top tables or the top cut of regional events. And then last but not least, we have the niche / unsolved leaders, which will a bit self-explanatory, but we'll get more to that down the line.
I'll explain my thoughts on specifically one of them, as one of them are dear to my heart, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there's an elephant in the room if you look there, but
Colin, I want you to start off with RP Wall, or I want you to actually start off with BY Luffy, because I know you for this set, especially after today's testing that we did today, you're really excited to play that deck for set 7. What's your kind of thoughts going into that deck and why you think it's... I mean, I think we both understand why it's S tier, but I want to make sure that you verbalize why you think it's S tier.
The deck's just, like... It's one of those things where we're in a world without Sakazuki, so bottom decking is just not as consistent.
Yeah.
Like, obviously there's mono blue decks, but we'll get to those later. So, just the sheer power behind having the Gecko double Sabo combo, where you just become a 9k leader and have 2 guaranteed blocks, is just absurd. Like one Gecko becomes 18 Dawn worth of stuff, and the addition of OP07's rocket, quote-unquote rocket Luffy, or the egghead 5-drop Luffy that sacrifices himself to kill a 4-drop and draw a card, it honestly helps a lot in the law matchup. It just gives you a lot of extra like control in the to where previously in EB1 format we just didn't have that kind of sustainability. So yeah, this deck is very, very good now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I think it's also got like this. It's got this ceiling of skill that it's going to be shown through its deck list, and it's through 4 cards. And those 4 cards are because those are the 4 cards that everyone can kind of toy with in the deck. that are free agents, because mostly this is a 46 card engine at the end of the day. There's not much change between the 46 cards, but there is at least 4 cards in the deck that I think you could change around, which I think will show a lot of stuff that I'm excited to see what people come up with. Personally, I want to try stuff like Tempest Kick in there, just as a like extra draw power while being able to do, you know, combo with Rocket Luffy. 4-drop Kuzan especially. I want to do a 2-2 of like Tempest Kick to 4-drop Kuzan for better value Morias. Plus, again, using it in combination with the powerful Rocket Luffy that it is. That card just sets up too much, and it's amazing. You're right. That card enabled so much for the deck, and I'm glad we get it now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that guy just does so much, man. Like I said, versus RP Law, he just blows up like the large majority of the deck.
Yeah.
Your Kid Killers, their Charade, versus the black decks like Lucci and Moria, Rocket Luffy can blow up Rebecca, so just clears a blocker out of the way. He's just really versatile.
Absolutely. I think probably what everyone thinks is going to be the best deck in the format is RP Law. Deck is just so aggressive, so fast-paced, has really good draw power with Reiju. Really good defense as well, being that it runs Shreya and uses Captain Kid, the 5-drop.
Yeah.
And then it also just has really good control. It just knows everything that you want to in a deck, and I don't know why it was printed. Don't know why. I mean, I'm glad it's finally here, because I know a lot of people were excited whenever this leader was shown back in like set 2 or 3 for us. But it's gotten the love that it deserves, and it's going to show for a good while, because I know that even next set it gets even worse for us. Hopefully we don't get that full power RP Law
the
deck,
Black Maria.
Yeah.
RP Law, yeah.
No,
This leader's just crazy.
Crazy.
Yeah, he just gets... Honestly, he just gets better and better as more good red and purple cards come out. To be honest with you, it's kind of like Black Yellow Luffy, where like between EB1 to now, he really only got one card, which is the 2K Sanji. But honestly, it actually...
blocker. Thank you.
Yeah, but it actually makes like a big difference. It's just the 6K 2K Sanji is just another body that you can shambles into. Funny enough, it's actually the biggest body you can shambles into because it's a 6K. Every other thing that you leader ability into is actually only a 5K at most, aside from Kid Killer, obviously. But
yeah,
the Sanji's also a blocker, right? So
yeah,
he's crazy.
Well, even then, like Kid Killer's still a 5K on your opponent's turn. It's not like it's always a 7K. It's only when attacking, so that's a big deal. Yeah. No, I agree fully. I don't think there's going to be much variance in those lists, unfortunately. I think those are just going to be the same 50-card lists across the board. If somebody does come up with something, I'd love to see it, but as of right now, with all of our testing, I've seen the same 50 cards. It's not changing, but it doesn't need to. It knows what it needs to do, and it gets it done really effectively. I think, hands down, the best aggro deck we've ever had printed in One Piece so far, unless you want to talk about weenie Sakazuki with Hound Blazes, but
it's like it has the same feel as Sakazuki, where it's like you can play like this aggro tempo deck where you present a threat, remove their body, present a threat, remove their body each turn, and for a lot of decks there's just too much to deal with.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
I think we can leave those two alone. I don't think there's much spice to really talk about with those two. And even with A tier, we're gonna get into A tier for a second here, but there's just not much to talk about other than that these are the next 4. They're not S tier quite yet because they can still do a lot of bricking, in my opinion. And I think you've come to the same conclusion after seeing like testing with Lucci. You've played a lot of Moria yourself recently, and then I've played a bit of Bonnie, and I feel like that deck's clunky. And now I'm just never gonna give an LS tier ever out of spite. It's just out of spite. Love you, Jonas, but it's never coming. It's never going into S tier out of spite. But I'll let you start with Lucci if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. And again, just like I said earlier, as a bit of a disclaimer with A tier, the difference between S tier and A tier for this tier list honestly is fairly marginal. The reason why Law and Luffy are in S, for example, is mainly because statistically, as we've seen in the Asian tournaments, it's just that clear difference in results, but it is still by just a few percentage points as far as power level goes. Lucci, for example, honestly can contend with pretty much the rest of the decks on this list. Of course, his hardest matchup is probably the Black Yellow Luffy, right? But then he beats up RP Law pretty handily, so you have that give and take there. I think this will be a very popular leader. Definitely a lot of people that enjoyed Sakazuki in the previous format, one of which is actually me, would probably enjoy this deck. Like Trevor was saying though, there are definitely clear differences with the flexibility of Lucci as opposed to Sakazuki in the past, because you are playing a lot of the same cards, or a lot of similar cards that do not have counter, which you can't just cycle them willy-nilly like you could in Sakazuki back in the day. So that's what we mean by it can be a bit more bricky. Like if you're playing the stage version, for example, it's hard to get rid of your extra copies of Eni's Lobby. You're playing a lot of boss monsters like between the Gecko Morius, the Isho, if you want to be playing Isho, the new Secret Rare Sabo. You can potentially get bricked on those too, and it's just not the easiest thing in the world to be able to cycle those out into better cards. So
no, I fully agree. It turns out, especially with just the filtering that Sakazuki had, but like the few cards difference between like this type of list and a Sakazuki list was those blue cards, right? And those blue cards made a huge difference as well in how the game was played. And when you have decks that like BY Luffy, because you can do a lot of different things with that deck, but it swings super tall and also plays the indestructible blocker, which Lucci just hates. Lucci cannot deal with that blocker, and that's a big deal. And that's why I still think it's going to always be A tier, at least for a little while, is because it can't deal with BY Luffy, and even then, even though it can technically have a good matchup in RP Law, if RP Law high rolls, and we know it can do that easily, it still can just blow out Lucci very quickly.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
of the breaking. The breaking situation is just another reason that it can lose to RP Law out of nowhere.
Yeah, it's very possible for Lucci to just have a hand of like 6 cards, but only like 2k counter in total. And that's where Law really capitalizes on that. So, I mean, and that's just the power of Law too. It's just one of those decks that if it has the right cards, it can just high roll anybody. So, but yeah, moving on to Moria. Moria's in a very similar boat to Lucci. Obviously, they don't play the same, right? The funny thing is that Moria is actually probably the worst black deck at playing the 8-drop Moria, because, you know, he just has the worst Moria lines, especially in today's economy. But like the thing is, his matchup spreads like very similar to Lucci's. He's good versus RP Law, but he gets beat up by Black Yellow Luffy. That's just the fact of the matter. And most of the rest of his matchup spread is, like I said, like just very similar. It was definitely a big hit losing Great Eruption out of this deck. Like Tempest Kick is good too, don't get me wrong, but it's just Eruption being there for like your early turns as you're setting up, and you get to do like an Absalom along the way was like a thing that I feel like a lot of us kind of took for granted, and then we kind of realized once the ban list went into effect. But yeah.
No, 100% agreeable. It is the worst black deck, but it's still going to beat out everything below B tier. It has a very good matchup into most of those decks, just because of the raw power of black cards being Rebecca, Rob Lucci, Gecko. Even, you brought it up there, and I understand that it's still not as powerful as Eruption, but Tempest Kick is a very strong card and does not need to be underlooked, I think. Because most black decks can easily fill their trash, and even if you don't need it for the -3, if like you're playing it for an early game, you still always get that draw power, which is really strong. It is a hand filter if you need it to be, because maybe you just foresee yourself not needing the -3 at it. But yeah, that's my thoughts on Gecko. I agree with you full-heartedly, and just it plays a little worse than Lucci still.
Yeah, in my opinion, if you want to play a mono black deck and you want to win a tournament with a mono black deck, I think Lucci is the better of the two.
Yeah.
But if for some reason you just really don't like playing Lucci, maybe it just doesn't fit your playstyle or something, Gecko is also a very solid pick.
Agreeable. All right, I want to go over Bonnie just a little bit here, because I don't think there's much to touch on, because she's still very new. I think she still has a lot of undiscovered ways of playing her. I know a lot of people are still doing the Supernova Don Quixote family package, but I have an idea of trying to just do Supernova, because I think trying to mix those two, because there's no overlap. I think whenever you're doing two different searchers, there has to be some type of overlap, or just has to be raw power. And that was like Whitebeard, right? Like Whitebeard had no overlap between those two, but the cards each of them searched were very powerful in different regards. For me, it feels like Bonnie is trying to do the same thing on both ends, and Supernova is just that much more powerful to me because it has Cavendish, Basil, and Kid. The Don Quixote family is only trying to really search 10-drop, and that's just not good enough for me. I think when you have that packet, I feel like I could just play like 4 Don Quixote Rosonates and 4 of the 10-drop and be fine. I don't think I need to be playing extra 2Ks. That's my opinion, and I want to try that myself. Maybe testing. Maybe we'll come back after a Gen Con with a new tier list and have different ideas, but that's my opinion on Bonnie. Current lists that I'm seeing are clunky. Very clunky to me, and I want to see if we can fix that. But if you have any thoughts, I want you to make sure you put them out there. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. I think that's pretty agreeable. Like, there's only so many good cards in the Don Quixote family, unfortunately, right?
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of a similar issue with, like, the Fortress Yamato decks back in the day.
Yep.
Yeah, it's just when you're trying to find that correct mix between the two engines, it just sometimes you're a little bit too short on one, but you're trying to like fill in cards for the other, and it just doesn't feel the best. Bonnie's still definitely a great deck, though. Obviously, That's why we put it in A tier. She's crazy good against Black Yellow Luffy. She's out of the entire list here, she's actually the one deck that actively beats up Black Yellow Luffy. Funny enough. The only thing is that, like Trevor said, she has her own inconsistency. She can be a little bit clunky, and the RP Law matchup, in my opinion, still isn't the best for her. She does have some tools to play through it, of course. Like the Basil Hawkins, the new Basil Hawkins is a really good card in that matchup, but otherwise, RP Law can just like sometimes get under her, especially with the Kid Killer combos and stuff like that. That's kind of like a consistent pattern you'll see amongst the A and B tiers, is that they are probably like reasonable or maybe even favorable versus one of the two S tier decks, but then kind of get beat up by the other one. So you kind of just have to pick and choose.
It's a weird rock paper. It's not even like rock paper scissors on the format, in my opinion. It's just a weird format in terms of consistencies and wins. It was pretty standard. Like, you had your best decks in other formats because they just beat every other deck, except for maybe the 2 decks that were in S tier, or the 3 decks that were in S tier. But this format there are 2 best decks, and if you pick a deck that's in S tier, you're going to lose to. It's just really weird. There's a lot of it's very weird on the format. I want to go over Enel. We put Enel up here, and here's my opinion on Enel. I think it's going to always be very high tier because it's, at the end of the day, it's a skill check deck. And I think whenever you're in a 9-round tournament, things are going on. It's a long day. That can etch out a lot of wins. Whitebeard, I have a lot of my wins because people just don't understand how to play into the deck. And Enel is even worse to try to play into, especially because it also has a good card pool. With Sakazuki being gone, and that was its worst matchup, it has free reign to do anything that it wants to into the format. And I would damn near say it could beat every deck in A and S tier. There are ways to play into it that make it where the other decks can have a good time into it. Yeah. Sabo specifically, any deck that can play Sabo is going to have a good time into any yellow deck. I think Colin can agree on that.
Absolutely, yeah.
But specifically, there's always going to be something that Enel can do. It's very cheeky. Triggers are always good. Being able to heal one, always being able to heal one, go back up to 2 constantly is annoying. It's a good deck. That's about really all I can say about it.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's definitely more of a skill check than I'd say Whitebeard was, in the sense that you have to play very patiently against an Enel. Otherwise, you might just accidentally get triggered and die on the crackback. It's actually interesting with Enel. We put it in A tier, even though the funny thing is that technically, like, between S and A tier, the rest of the decks he actually doesn't, on paper, have a favorable matchup into.
No.
Every other deck within the top 2 tiers has a reasonable strategy of beating Enel, but it's just one of those things where Enel's just such a flexible deck, and sometimes he just has those unbeatable draws where, he just curves out like Katakuri to Yamato to Ace, and sometimes that's just too much value for like any deck to deal with unless they draw well enough. Even in past formats like Nationals, for example, with Jonas winning with Enel, he actively admitted it was not a favorable deck into Sakazuki, and this was a tournament where like Sakazuki was like the majority of the field, right?
Yeah, it was a disgusting amount of the field.
Yeah, and nor was it favorable versus Purple Luffy either. But it's just one of those decks where it's like you have the skill check aspect of it on top of it being a very flexible leader in of itself, and it's just you're playing a lot of really good cards regardless.
And something that's really, because we've been, I'm going to talk about this a little bit because we have a lot of new players coming into the game that weren't around for sets 1 through 3, maybe even sets 1 through 4 realistically, because Whitebeard got banned in 4. But the power of Rush does not need to be underestimated. And like the fact that they have a somewhat unkillable card on the field is really good stat line and has Rush attached to it is insane. As well as the new boss monster being Ace that has Rush, heals you. That's another crazy card to me. I'm excited to use that. I hate it now. I'm never going to play an L through for a tournament. But for testing, that's going to be an amazing time playing that Ace down and just hitting your opponent for 10k. You guys have to understand, I love that feeling. That's my favorite part of the game.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to category where it's like, again, on paper, every deck or most of the decks have a very solid way of beating Enel, but sometimes you might just have that hand where he just spams like 10 drop aces on you, like back to back to back, and you just die.
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
There are just some draws from Enel that you just can't deal with, and you just have to be okay with that.
No, absolutely understandable. I don't think there's anything else to really discuss in A. I'm excited to see how these decks perform. And again, subject to change on this tier list. I think a lot of things are going to change as we see because I think you're right. I think the first tournament that we're going to see is like in Latin America or Europe or something like that. So I'm excited to see what they do with the OP7, especially because we're in a different format than Japan was during where the Asian countries were for set 7. They had Sakazuki legal during set 7. So it still reigned supreme. But when those cards got banned, there was an instant shift. And so I'm excited to see what comes out of this. And it's kind of why whenever Colin brought this tier list, I'm going to tangent a little bit here, is when Colin brought me this tier list idea, I was like, dude, honestly, tier lists are nice, especially, going into a format that like we got to see during Japan. But this is the first time that whenever a tier list is put out right now that we realistically don't know what's the best deck. There might be some sleeper picks that are just out there that people haven't put enough time in on that could come up, and because of the format, it's just gone. The boogeyman is gone. The gates are open. Let's see what happens, kind of thing. And I'm excited to see what comes of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And me too. Like previous formats, I would say was probably like either like solved with some kind of triangle format, right, between Sakazuki versus Moria versus like a yellow deck. But here it's like this is more like a pentagon or hexagon of like good decks that match up favorably and unfavorably into each other. This is one of those formats where other personalities I think in the One Piece sphere would agree with me, is like just pick a good deck that you really like, just practice it really hard, and that can be your deck for the format. It's not like you have to play Sakazuki if you want to like win. It's not like you have to play Whitebeard if you want the best chance of winning during OP3, right?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. There's always something. My friend Moses says it a lot, and a lot of people might not agree with it, but it's like, if you're not good at a deck, but you're good at another deck, like, let's say you're not good at Sakazuki, but you're really good. I'm not good at Sakazuki, but I was really good at Whitebeard. I would rather be the best Whitebeard player in the room than be the most mediocre fucking Sakazuki player walking into that room. That's just how it is. It's at the end of the day, like, if you know your deck better than most of your opponents, then you've got it. I think you've got better chances than you just trying to walk in with the best deck, still not understanding it, still not knowing completely the lines. When I watched Colin and Arvin play Sakazuki, my mind was just like, nah, don't do it. It's not worth it. I don't have the patience for it. I don't. And that's something to take to hopefully some people can learn from that as well. Don't try to format yourself to the meta. Do what is comfortable. That's the best thing I can really tell you.
Yeah, like past formats, I would maybe tell you like you should try to learn Sakazuki or you should try to learn Whitebeard, but this format definitely, like, if just because you see Law and Luffy in S tier and you want to win a tournament, but you just really dislike both of those decks, but you really like Bonnie, just play Bonnie. It's a perfectly reasonable pick.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that topic actually is going to tangent into B tier. I think a lot of B tier decks could win tournaments. Personally, I put Zoro in there. I talked to Colin about this before we even brought it up. I'm gonna touch on Zoro just a little bit here, and then we can move on to the better decks. Okay. Zoro is going to always be something that can come up, especially when Sakazuki's gone. I think Zoro can just be a very strong deck again. It turns out swinging 5s and 6s when a 6k leader is not in meta, and an entire control deck is like a complete control deck is not in meta anymore, can do pretty well. Yes, there's some hurdles to get over, but it's a deck that can run hot and get around them. And I think that's enough for me to put it in B tier. Colin, I may not agree with that, but hey, that's the differences in opinions. That's why we're on here together. It's not the Colin show. It's our show.
In a world of Luffy and Lucci, I feel a little bit worried about Brig Zoro, but
nah. Look, I hit somebody for 21k today, so I'm okay with that. Unblockable. It still feels pretty good. It turns out. I think Zoro can do really well into the format. I think it can do better than any deck in C tier. That's really that's why I have to put it there.
That's fair.
It's not better than any of the blue decks, and it might be better than like Uta and Perona, but that's because those are slow running decks. Like, they take time to build. But other than that, though, like, other decks in B tier can easily be Zoro. That's what I'll say. I'll let you take over Boa though, if you don't mind, because I don't know much about Boa myself, personally.
I'll probably group Boa and Dofi together. Obviously, they try to win the game a little bit differently, but they play a lot of similar cards. Of course, being the 7 Warlord package with the new Jinbei, Edward Weevil, just generically good 7 Warlord cards, the 6-drop Boa, right? So, and probably the most important key piece in both of those decks is Gravity Blade Raging Tiger, which is just such a good tool against all of the black decks, in particular Luffy, Lucci, and Gecko. If they try to set up some kind of board with like Blocker Sabo plus body, you just Gravity Blade both your bodies. You'll never have access to it again.
Yeah.
Which is also kind of a double-edged sword in that the tendency is that for both of those decks, they have to see the Gravity Blade on 7 or 8 Dawn to kind of be in the game. But it's still a very reasonable strategy. Nonetheless, they like to guard early, gain value through the removal spells and through just like their natural leader power. Dofi accumulating extra bodies on the board, Boa drawing cards, and then finishing off with like a giant 10-drop, usually Kaido, to draw 4 cards, and then just have like this giant 10-drop when you're still at like 3 or 4 life, and just take over the game from there. Pretty reasonable strategy against most of the decks between S and A tier. Of course, there is that consistency issue like we spoke about before, where it just drops them by just a few percentage points that makes them like not quite at the level of the top 2 tiers.
Blue's always going to have it until they get like guaranteed searchers that are worth playing, but it's a consistency issue at the end of the day. A lot of the decks in the above tiers can search a lot of their answers, and that's a big deal. And Gecko, yes, it doesn't run a searcher, but it runs a Miller that it has access to its graveyard, so that's a searcher in my opinion. And Nell doesn't run a searcher sometimes, but it still can. And it also doesn't need to because of the fact that Yellow has a lot of random draw power for some god-awful reason. They printed cards that draw in that deck. Yeah, it just has a lot of stuff to get there. Blue is going to have a consistency issue, but it can etch out a win in a lot of situations, being able to play the grind game really well. Both of them are playing 10-drop Kaido, and God, we know how good that card is. When you get to play it properly, right? When you're not pressured super off hard, and you just get to raw draw 4 cards and play a 10-drop 12k, so it turns out it's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I put like Uta kind of in a similar vein in the sense of like the power levels there, but just the consistency in a sense, which is kind of weird to say in Uta because like she quote unquote draws an extra film card every turn, but it's also the fact that you're kind of locked to film cards.
Yep.
And just a lot of the decks in SNA tier just kind of power creeped beyond like OP2 film cards.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Kind of just the fact of the matter.
No, you're right. It's the same issue that I have with like it's sort of the same vein that I have with Bonnie, right? Where like Bonnie can search the 10-drop Dofi, but what else are we searching with that archetype, right? Like it's got nothing else really to it, and that's the issue. But it's also a thing as well because it does always have the engine to draw extra cards. Most card games, hand advantage is usually the way you win the game. This game's a little bit different because with countering out of your hand, and Uta plays a lot of bricks, you can just be bricked up on 12 events, or like 3 events, 2 8-drop kids, 3 Luffys, and 2 Namis. And that can be your hand. That can be your 12-card hand.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I've lost with them plenty of times. But because, again, it has the value engine that it does, it's going to be better than anything in C for sure. For sure, it's going to be better than anything in C. At least, hopefully, in our opinion. I don't know if Colin can agree with that, but not etching up to A quite yet.
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. And category 2 is just it has the power level. Obviously, spamming 10-drop Mom is amazing when you can do it. Mm-hmm. It's just like for me, category being in B tier. Honestly, this might make some people mad, but I could see category being at like C tier below too, depending. The only reason why I personally put it in B tier is just because it has the kind of like bullshit factor to it of like just having the right triggers at the right time to like, to win just about any game. But it's just the fact of the matter is that the rest of SNA tier have like a very clear way of beating it, kind of like how they beat NL, but like NL has like a little bit more flexibility, whereas Katakuri just like is a very telegraphed deck, so to speak, aside from BS triggers, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah.
No, I don't disagree. There is a version of Katakuri that I do want to build. I'll talk to you about that later tonight, Colin, whenever we hopefully start testing after this video.
Ooh, spicy.
But there is an idea that I want to run with Katakuri because I think it can get away with it nowadays. But we'll discuss that later. Maybe that again will subject to change on this tier list could change how Katakuri plays, or for us personally, if we see it in a better light or even in a worse light. Because it's the only way that I can see Katakuri working currently. I think the last deck to touch on here is Perona. Perona has, again, it's these engines that we're trying to run too many things in, or we're trying to do too many things, or these types of decks that aren't already like super powerful like Sokka was. But Sokka, again, had overlapping engine. It had double Navy. Perona's can't really run double Navy. I think right now, the best deck that we've seen for it is like a Wano version, if I'm correct.
Yeah, the quote-unquote, you can be my samurai engine, especially with the new Otama that came out of OP07, the Searcher Otama.
Yeah.
Pretty good. So it kind of has that card advantage engine now, which is really strong for her. It's one of those things where it's like, she's probably pretty strong versus all of A tier, but it's not fantastic versus the two S tier decks.
Gotcha.
So,
makes sense. Absolutely. Yeah. No, that 100% makes sense. I don't know what you call them, but I don't think there's really much else to touch on. I think C tier is pretty obvious for everybody who looks at it. Some outliers that I'm excited to test myself are like RP Luffy and Green Purple Dofi. Those two might have a chance in my head, but again, we'd have to do a lot of testing for those.
A lot of C tier for me is like decks that like won or top some sort of important event in Asia, like a flagship or championship series.
Gotcha.
But you maybe seen it like once or twice within the entirety of OP7 for Asia.
Yeah.
Like for example, Yamato you'll see every now and then. Ace was something that people were talking about, but he just hasn't put up that many results. Mm-hmm. But people were just very impressed to see him get a couple first place finishes at flagships, which he is like a cool anti-meta pick. Reiju 2 is one of those things where it's like Reiju could be much higher if it weren't for RP Law being as prevalent as he is. Like honestly, she's pretty reasonable versus every other leader in the top tier. Is just RP Law is just that bad. Like it's just a really cursed matchup for her, right? So
yeah,
that's why I just couldn't put it beyond C tier, because we just know like a solid percentage of a field is going to be RP Law, especially in North America. I feel it's a pretty popular deck. So
it's a little funny that they printed that leader when in how her mechanics work whenever they already had RP Law printed, because it's just like the antithesis of what I think that's the word I'm looking for here is like of what Reiju wants to do is just be less Dawn, but also so does RP Law, and it does it way better because it minuses 3 every turn. So
but he uses her SR better than she does, so it's like oh my god.
Yeah, because her playing the SR still takes 4 Dawn in turns. Well, I guess technically 2, but exactly not enough.
Well, yeah, I mean for her it's cost 2 Dawn to draw like to draw like 2.5 cards. For Law it's just like -3 Dawn to draw 2 cards. So
it also may have a kid blocker on the board, so it really is just like gain 1 active back and swing for an extra amount of Dawn.
So
I think the last things to really touch on here, again, nothing really needs to talk about with C, I think, is me/Unsolved. I agree with most of this list, actually. I'm excited to see if people can figure out what to do with like Lakers Craw. A Law I know has been seen I've been seeing posts of on Twitter with Red Green Law constantly. The deck is still a fan favorite deck. A lot of people want it to work. Can they make it work though? Cavendish is really strong, so we'll see. And then I know Cross and a lot of his goons are hyping up Rebecca. That's it. I've never seen more.
Look, the more people talk to me about Rebecca, the more convinced I am. But I just know, like, every time I pick up the deck, I'm just like, man, I'm not sure how this is supposed to work. But I understand. Like, I understand what they're saying. Like, her 8-drop Morias are probably the craziest out of any deck. Some of the new Dressrosa cards that came out, like Scarlet from EV1, the Toy Soldier, just gives you like a lot of really cool Moria lines. So I see where they're coming from. It's just, but like again, that's why it's niche/unsolved is that I need to see it top to really believe it, so to speak.
I'm looking at these. I'm sorry, everybody in the video. I am looking at these cards because you said Scarlet or something, and I was like, "What the hell does that card do?"
Her Rebecca's mom, I think. I don't know. I haven't watched the show in a long time.
Don't admit that on this video. You just killed half of the fucking viewers, man.
I'm a big fan.
You may trash this character, play with 1 Dressrosa type character card other than Scarlet with a cost of 3 or less from your hand rested. Then give us but one of your opponent's. Wow, that's a really cool card.
Yeah, so
Okay.
you do some cool combos with like because I think it's a 2-drop, right?
Yeah, it's a 2-drop, so you can play
so
it
you
off
go,
of
like,
Moria.
Yeah, you go like Moria, Revive Scarlet, plus 4-drop Rebecca, 4-drop Rebecca, Revive like a Shrinker or something. During your main phase, Scarlet tag out into
Kairos or something.
Kairos, blow up something
Wow.
big. Yeah. Yeah.
No, that's
So
awesome.
There's a lot of cool lines that you can do with her. But yeah, and then Lakers Croc or Purple Yellow Croc. It's just one of those decks where like people talk about it. It's kind of like Enel, where if you just have back-to-back boss monsters, you kind of just outvalue your opponent. It's a really hard deck to kill, funny enough, because if you just spam 8-drop Purple Crocodile into 10-drop Ace into a Yamato, and then even if they go down to 0 life, you can't just like go 15 dot leader swing all in, because they might be holding up Okama Way to just redirect your giant swing into a body.
Oh yeah. No, you're right there.
That deck's like really annoying to kill. It's one of those decks where you just have to be very patient playing against. Very similar to Enel. It's just he doesn't have like that clear power level that Enel does, but he does have some cool things going on about him just by having access to purple, being able to ramp up to the boss monsters. You
gotta gaslight me on that one there, buddy. I want to try that out myself now.
That thing's pretty good. Like, someone sold me on it at like a previous regional. It was like, yeah, man, without Sakazuki around, Crocodile's crazy. You just play Vivi or the Miss Wednesday on 3 Dawn, and then she just ramps you for no reason. And I'm like, well, you're not. I guess you're technically not wrong. Obviously, you just don't have like that safety net that Enel does with the leader power, but you have a more interesting card pool, so to speak. Then there's also Ivankov. I just put this there in the sense that like because a lot of people started talking about it recently, more so in OP8, where like he started to top here and there. I can kind of see in a world of like RP Law and Lucci where you might be pretty good, but again, I just have to see that happen in North America for me to like really put him up on like a true tier, so to speak.
That makes sense. And then Whitebeard's here. So I'm gonna give a brief synopsis of why I think it's here. In all of my testing for Whitebeard, you can never find me. I will never test Whitebeard. I would like to hear from other people who play Whitebeard consistently as much as I have in my life. Talk to me about it and tell me that you do test it, because if you do, let me know what you do, because I can't find testing to be useful with that deck. For me, it's put 50 cards together that are usually the same 50 cards that they were back in set 2 and 3, walk up to a regionals, probably do really well because, again, to go back to that skill check thing that we talked about, and then be okay with that, right? But this format specifically, because we lost one of our best matchups being Sakazuki, RP Law feels really consistently aggro, like too aggro for us. And then Black Belt Luffy access to Rocket League can now pop all of our blockers, so we're never really safe against that deck, swinging super tall at us. Lucci and Gecko doing black card things with like reviving, playing more, or playing Rebecca, reviving Sabo, play Sabo, pass. That's enough sometimes to just kill us because we can't do anything our timer is kicked in still. And then Bonnie's an instant loss. I don't know how to play into that deck. It stuns us too much. We have to play on curve with Whitebeard, and that 5-drop Bonnie just says no. You're now back a curve, and you're on an awkward curve too. It's not like you're back like a 5-Dawn curve. You're back like a 6-Dawn curve, and on your 7-Dawn turn, that's horrible for us. And Nell, we know about Nell. If you're a Whitebeard player and you can beat a Nell consistently, tell me how you do it, because if it isn't seeing 3 Whitebeards or 2 to 3 Whitebeards, you're just not beating that deck. That's my synopsis on Whitebeard. It will probably do okay. It'll show up at a regional in this format. I know it will. You don't have to tell me. You don't.
We always say it's bad every format, but then we end up seeing it like top 32, top 16 a regional.
Or win one. It has won 2,
yeah.
I think it won 2 in the last 2 formats. It won 1 at the beginning of OP06, and I think it won 1 in EBO1. Someone please don't let me know on that. But I know Jonathan Cho, I believe is his name. I need to get in contact with that guy, because that guy plays Whitebeard like a crazy mother trucker, and I'd love to meet him and talk to him about it, because he's the one who's doing this buggy list that he's been doing and getting really good results with it, and I'm really happy to see that. But anyways, that's my thoughts on Whitebeard. That's my TED Talk.
Yeah, I see where you're coming from. I still think I think Whitebeard's true tier is probably somewhere in B. I think if Zoro can be in B, I understand like why Zoro specifically would be in B as opposed to the old man, but Whitebeard's Whitebeard at the end of the day. You'll still
Look,
like
you gotta tell me, man. I love that deck. That's my favorite deck. But man, it's just like I can never, you know what, I can never test it. Every time I test into Arvin, it's just like he constantly has 12 2Ks in his hand. And he only has a 3-card hand, but he still has 12 2Ks. And none of our testing goes well. But again, I can, what happened with Oviedo? Little backstory is we tested all night with Black Yellow Luffy against Whitebeard when that first came out as a structure deck, just to figure out how to play into the matchup for Whitebeard. I didn't see one Black Yellow Luffy, and we tested a good amount of hours into that matchup. It's just like, testing's useless for that deck. Just play the deck and do pretty well, probably.
Yeah, I'm sure, like we said, for the upcoming regionals and other major events, I'm sure someone is going to figure out, whether it be you, Trevor, or Garrett, or Brandon, or Jonathan Joe, or any Whitebeard masters out there. I mean, we like in Texas last week, we also had like, I think 2 Whitebeards that made it to top cut.
Yeah.
So like, yeah.
I think Jonathan was one of them. That's why I brought up his name. That
nice.
He's been doing wicked on results, I believe.
So.
I think he was in Texas doing really well. Like every time I look on Twitter, he's got another Whitebeard list he posted. It's been like the same one for like the last 3 or 4 events, but I just wanted to shout him out on that deck for sure.
Yeah. I mean, bottom line is every format we say, oh yeah, the old man's done. Like everyone knows how to play against him. Every other deck power creeped him, and then the next thing we know, we see him top of regional. So
yeah,
who knows?
It's always going to be and that's why I also say it's niche and unsolved, because it's technically niche and unsolved. I don't know how to solve. Technically, the deck is not solved because it feels like the worst deck in the format, but it will overperform at a regional for some reason, and I don't know why. No one can tell me the answer, but I don't want to keep this video on for too long. We rambled a lot there.
Yeah. But yeah, that is pretty much it for the tier list, guys. If you made it this far, thank you again so much for watching. Obviously, we don't have every leader in the game in this tier list, otherwise this would be several hours worth of us rambling, which I personally don't want to do. But if you want us to do it, let us know in the comments, and let us know what other leaders you think should be on this tier list, if at all, or if any leaders that we already have on here should be in a different tier. I'd like to get your thoughts and opinions on that too. If you like stuff like this, again, let us know. Like and subscribe, as always, and click the notification bell for more. See you guys.
See ya.